Loud. Okay. Welcome, Sandy. Sandy is there live. Welcome, welcome.
Hello, hello.
It's good to see you again. So we're moving into the last session of the first day of the online series. And we've kind of gone on a little bit of a journey so far today. We've kind of talked about what we're going to be expecting from the sessions. Some of you were already there, looked at whose responsibility it was. Then we had a powerful conversation from Val Munduruku, who is part of the Munduruku tribes in Brazil. And she shared what was happening with her tribe, the land, the family, quite a sobering conversation. And now we move in to a more hopeful opportunity as we're kicking off and creating the future to start talking about a well-being economy and looking at how net zero is the gateway to a thriving business and a thriving Scotland. And we have Bonnie from Remarkable joining us as a speaker today. But before we start, there is a public service announcement from my granny, which gives us a few moments to sit, to chill, relax, and remind ourselves what this is really all about as we embark on this journey in this conversation.
There's always to see something in nature that astounds you. Always. On some occasions, my husband and myself, we got up 5 o'clock and went down to the seaside, and it was absolutely heaven. There was such a peaceful air about it, and all you could see now and again, a seal climbing onto one of these wee islands. So that was always quite good. Early in the morning, there's such a peacefulness in the air. You know, you don't get through the day. I don't know, we haven't seen any seagulls here. There was a time, every morning at a certain time, you heard one seagull, sea thing, quawking about, you know, early in the morning. At first, when I saw the really high mountains, I wondered what that was. And then it dawned on me, I said, oh my God, these are the mountains. I don't know, I was quite in awe of it, especially when the sun has been shining all day and there's a glow in the mountains. The whole mountain lights up. I was quite smitten with that when I saw it first. The same, the sea can light up. I remember there was a really, really hot day, and the sea had taken a glow. All the waves that came in, they were all lit up. That was quite a sight to see. Yeah. Well, I grew up with nature. We had quite a few fields. And as children, we had to walk there, you know. Sometimes, you know, once I said to my mother, much to my greatest regret afterwards, other children have holidays to play in. We have holidays to walk in. But when I look back, I always enjoyed it. Yeah, I always enjoyed it. And I can still remember crabbling about on the earth, and we had really good soil. You could get your arm right into it and felt the cool earth going over your arm, you know. So, as I say, I'm a peasant by nature. Getting things to grow and walking the earth. Yeah. You know, it's very peaceful and very therapeutic. As I say, if you open your eyes, there's always something interesting to see in nature.
Right, Granny. I'll see you in a bit.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Just a wee reminder of when we talk about climate, how it can be more personal than that. But Bonnie, I would love to just start by inviting you to answer the question, how is Net Zero the gateway to a thriving business and a thriving Scotland? Unmute yourself.
Giving you all a moment to reflect on the question. Before I sort of go on into answering that question, I do want to sort of talk about my beautiful fashion accessory. Just so you know, it's not a dubious choice in my wardrobe. It is because I am recovering from a broken neck. But I don't want to concentrate on that. I want to concentrate on the question at hand. And there's lots of thinking that I've been doing over the last year, over the last few months. But the question that you've asked me, Tabitha, to contemplate is exciting. It's also an opportunity to bring hope into something that can be quite negative or quite heavy. And I also wanted to talk about, you know, a well-being economy as well, and what that means, and how to thrive in Scotland as a business owner, because I'm a business owner. I run a business, and our job is to support other businesses to achieve their ambition. But I mean, I've been thinking about particularly climate change and the types of practical things that we can do. But I also wanted to, you know, have an open conversation about what actually is the purpose of a well-being economy, and how does climate change fit into that as well. So I'd like to sort of have a meander, if that's okay with you, and we can both collectively try and put the world to right with a positive spin on things, if that suits you, and maybe we can include the other people that are on the call as well, and pose some questions to each other. How would that suit you, Tabitha?
I think that sounds wonderful. So, I mean, knowing that we're setting the ground rules of a meander, I think it's safe to say that we can make this a bit more of a conversation. So if at any point anybody wants to jump into the conversation as we're talking, don't feel that you have to wait to the end. You know, just raise your hand and kind of step into the space, and we can meander like a river together, Bonnie.
Yeah, I love that. And forge a new way out together, the path of least resistance, and what can we do together to achieve that. So for me, I'd like to start by, you know, saying the well-being economy for me is about people, planet, and profit. And I think that a lot of people are uncomfortable with that concept of the profit element. But we have an economy that needs to change. But we need to create a world where people can flourish. But there are parts of the economy in the globe that I think, you know, as one of our dear friends, Catherine Trebek, talks in her book about the economics of arrival, there are parts of the world that have actually arrived already, and there are other parts of the world that have to catch up. And it's a really interesting concept, but we need to create that the current economic system really doesn't really serve us any longer in the Western world. And I'm of the mindset to think that it doesn't need to be an all or nothing conversation. We have to have an and conversation. We have to think about economic growth and how that serves us. We need to deliver that decent standard of living for everybody in our world, so that they have enough. But we need to create and be aware of the fact that an economy needs to meet both people's needs and the planet's needs. Now, there's so many things that are interconnected with all of these concepts, but we actually need to slow down. And one of the things that I loved about the video you showed of your grandma was that there's this hunger and relentless desire to strive forward. But what I had that sense of was calming down and taking a step back to reflect and to appreciate what was so good about the simple things, and thinking about the otters and the feel of the earth in her hands. And I think that perhaps we need to have that moment of reflection and sort of step back. One of the things that the 21st century has created and is continuing to create is, again, the antithesis of what your grandma was saying, which is about that we're creating these pseudo satisfiers, that we're hunting and striving for things that are going to make us feel better. And actually what your granny was talking about was the freedom of what's outside our windows in the green space that is free and gives us that sense of satisfaction we don't even know. But we're trying to keep up with the Joneses all the time. You know, they create that status anxiety, that individual well-being is just perceived to feel better when we buy the next thing, we get the next thing. And actually that it as is a pseudo satisfier, it's a fake, it's not real, that it doesn't actually give us what we desire and what we want. And actually the simple free things in life cannot actually be the things that satisfy our well-being and give us a grounded sense of self. The other thing that I'm really interested in exploring more is the concept of failure demand. And you know, we have created things in the world to solve problems that we have created in the first place. And sometimes a simple walk in nature can solve a problem much more effectively than a glass of wine, some sort of false satisfier. And the consequences down the line of, you know, bad health, mental health, ill health, that's our society not solving the problem downstream and not solving the problem right at the beginning of the cycle. I really think that for me is something that businesses can really consider. You know, a practical example of failure demand is where it, you know, first originated from, was in a call center. They had problems with washing machines. I'm not sure if it was exactly that, but the contact center was created to solve customers' problems. And actually, if they'd have solved the design fault that was in the product in the first place, they wouldn't need to have hundreds of people answering customer complaints. So failure demand for me is something that as businesses that we can really decide to have a conversation about. And that feeds into one of the real major principles of the people element of People, Planet, Profit for me. And it actually also feeds into the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland's one of the dimensions needed for businesses, that stated that needed for business to contribute to that economic system change, which is about participation and leadership. And I'd like to just spend a moment thinking about that and the concept of failure demand and how those two things are linked. Our voice, the voice of the people that are in our businesses across every part of our hierarchy is so important. And often we are deaf as leaders to what's happening on the front line. Now, how does that connect to failure demand? Well, if there was in that system an opportunity for the people at the front line to say, hang on a minute, I am getting a sense that this is a problem that is being repeated to me time and time and time again. If there was a mechanism for them to feed that back to the design team or up the hierarchical organization to say, hang on a minute, if we solve this problem, then there would be more resources that we could use to enhance our business in a different way. If we allow our people in businesses at the front line who have the least power, often, to freely have a democratic voice in a business, to share what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what their perception, and also give them the authority to make some decisions, have agency to make some decisions, there'll be more engagement, there'll be more innovation, there'll be more opportunity for curiosity to enhance our businesses that will serve our customers, serve the people that are also working in them, but also the clients that we're serving as well. Just thought that was a really interesting connection. And I did say that it was a meander. But we're often creating things that are pseudo satisfiers that help solve a status anxiety, which we want our individual well-being is not being enhanced by.
I like it. It's a meander, but I think it's such a relevant point, because one of the things when you're thinking about economic systems change is it's hard to actually see the connections. And I think you've done a really beautiful job there of saying, well, if we look at our well-being, we can either go for a glass of wine, depending on who you are. It might be more than one glass of wine. And, I can put my hand up for that one at some points as times in my life, even though, I recognize the benefits of going out for a walk in nature. And what you're really saying is we make decisions in the moment without thinking about the long-term impact and what it's going to happen in the future. So we don't recognize that glass of wine, especially if it's like every night over 2 or 3 months, and that happened during lockdown. The research shows that people's alcohol intake increased. That then has an impact on weight gain, on health, on all of these issues that further down the line we've got to address. Whereas if we'd just been able to say, right at this precise moment, you need to do a different action. And you've beautifully highlighted that that's also how we function in business. So much of business can actually be sorting out the problems that have happened, instead of saying, if we just actually designed, and thought about these problems right at the beginning, then they might not have happened and we might not be spending that time. And, for me, you've made this beautiful link about the individual and the collective, the individual and the business. But then even what you were saying about the people on the front lines, it just took me back to the conversation that we just had with Val Mundaruku, who was saying exactly what you were talking about, Bonnie, that there they are on the front lines of living so close to the earth, understanding the relationship with the earth, how it's functioning, but also community and the way that their community functions. And yet business is coming in, not consulting them, not taking their needs into consideration, in actual fact, enacting legislation that could potentially remove them from the land, so treating the indigenous people as problems rather than actually as part of the solution. And you're just, for me, really highlighting that it's not just happening there in Brazil with the indigenous tribes, it's also happening in our businesses as well, where we're ignoring the voices of the people that are working in business who might have better solutions on how we can actually do things differently and stop us from having problems in the long run. And, it's, you've just managed to weave, I think, all of the thoughts from today together and all the conversations in a really powerful way, Bonnie.
Well, hopefully that's kind of you to say. I think that we've got a chance here to, there's this wonderful word in the English language and it's called and. So we can have short-term practical thinking, but we need to take action right now. But coupled with that, I love the concept of cathedral thinking. And if you're not familiar with that term, cathedral thinking in my mind is about, hundreds of years ago, it took generations to build a cathedral. There was a vision and there was a plan, and the person who instigated the building of a cathedral probably wasn't going to be there when it was open and functioning. But the idea of that long-term thinking, married and closely connected with short-term practical action, I think is a vital component, because in our economy at the moment, we are so it's just that there's this allure of return on investment. What's the ROI? What's the ROI? What are we going to, what are we going to, that GDP desperation for growth and for short-term growth. And we see that often when it comes to, the markets. We just praise that, wow, they're growing. The FTSE's up, Dow Jones is up. We love that. We're as nations, we are completely obsessed with seeing that growth. But there's an absolute place for the generations and the cathedral thinking that can happen over multiple generations. I really want to be a good ancestor, and the concept of being a good ancestor for me is embedded in the short-term actions that I'm going to be taking today, and as a business leader, but also as a business leader that supports and advises other businesses in practical ways that they can make changes in their business, so that we are going to firstly maintain a planet that we can all use to our advantage and protect for generations to come, but also so that we can not constantly exploit the planet for our own good. You know, we have this unwavering desire for growth at the cost and the exploitation of the planet that we desperately want to live in for future generations. So I like the idea of us having a moment about, you know, what as a business leader is my long-term plan, because boards, you know, PLCs, they are absolutely hungry for you know, short-term goals. My team, we've written a 10-year plan, and I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to be part of that business in 10 years' time necessarily. But I'm just a custodian of the business, because I want it to be sustainable, and I want it to be productive. I want it to be a place where people can flourish as individuals, and not just for the return on investment for the next 18 months, next 2 years. So yeah, and I don't want to be the person that just doesn't understand the individual well-being, at, you know, the growth of a business at the cost of an individual's well-being. That for me seems like an important contrast, you know, the now decisions and the long-term decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, you know, if we summarize what you're saying there, you know, a well-being economy is one where we're not placing short-term financial decisions over the long-term health and well-being of the people who live on the planet and the earth itself. And when you're saying the role that businesses can play there, I'm hearing you say it's about being a good ancestor, but thinking about a business as being a good ancestor, and what really is the long-term goals and objectives of a business 10 years, maybe even more into the future, and how can you start making those decisions today in order to address this short-term focus on profit at all costs. And that's something that's already emerged, Bonnie, in some of the other conversations that we've had today, where we've been looking at how, you know, even bringing it down to every 3 months and wanting more profit and more return on investment every 3 months. That's the thinking that's led to where we are today. This is the problem, because we're only focused on growth instead of saying that what's best.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, we're right in the middle of the climate change conversation. You know, that is definitely the context of which we're talking about, and in the spirit of some practical ideas and some things that we can do right now, I've made some notes about some ways that businesses can just consider, and they are literally, you know, basic ideas that we can consider that might make an impact, that will make an impact on climate change or the race to net zero, and each individual business leader's contribution might be just to consider these things and to talk to the team about them. And the very first point is actually make your voice heard by those in power. And I'm talking both to business leaders, but I'm talking also to every single person in an organization. I want to create an environment where there is the democratization of leadership. I know that my cognitive and intellectual capacity is limited to my own brain. If I include all of my people, or the voices of those across an organization, from the front line to service delivery, everybody, I can tap into the cognitive and intellectual capacity of so many more people. I have blind spots that I don't even know. Now, if we could do that by just starting conversations about climate change, net zero, what do those things mean to people? If we have passions, let's start having conversations with how do they connect as a business leader with our vision and our values? You know, are there links to the Sustainable Development Goals with our vision and our values? Are they? Is there an opportunity for us to perhaps write to our local MP and just ask the question, what's happening in our local community? I mean, this is a very, very simple but powerful contribution. What are you saying on your website? Have you thought about Sustainable Development Goals? Are you making a positive contribution by planting some trees? I mean, a simple thing that we did, and this is a minute contribution is we created a white paper. We're thought leaders in people practices, and for every white paper that was downloaded, we planted a tree. I mean, it seems a simple thing, but it's a small step, and we want to make an impact. And so we're going to talk about that on our website. I want to be held accountable for those things, but it's okay to say to the world, we're on this journey and we're trying to figure out how we can make an impact. I'm not trying to suggest that we're perfect. I'm suggesting that it's in our consciousness and we're thinking about it. So the very first and easy thing to do is let your voice be a positive power for change, even if it's just in your organization. What can we do that will make a difference? How can we talk about that to our clients? And then I suppose following on from that, which is just another point, is look at our supply chain. What are our suppliers doing? We could ask them. Maybe they'll have some great ideas that we haven't even thought about ourselves as business leaders. Put it on the agenda. If we're tendering for work for our own supply chain, put it on a part of an evaluation process. What's the evaluation criteria? What are you doing as part of our supply chain for climate change? Share some ideas, spark a conversation. It might even spark some sort of collaboration. It might sound obvious, but I don't think as many people are doing that as a state of norm. It's that happens elsewhere. Other people are doing that. I know that the Tesco CEO, he did that with his supply chain, and some big impacts have happened as a result. People have actually started to say, right, okay, this is something serious. I can't pretend that it's not on someone's agenda. What actually am I doing about it? What's my contribution? And I think that the idea of collaboration is such a foundation stone in our the importance of what communities can do and play that part as well. Obviously, within every business's supply chain or every business's collaborative network, we're going to buy some power somewhere along the line. We're buying energy. And another simple tactic is just to check, what's the green energy tariff? There's so much going on about energy costs at the moment. It might get lost in the conversation. Everyone's struggling to think about how they're going to pay for their bills. This is people at home. There's energy poverty, heat poverty. But it would be a good reminder, we do have power as individual purchasers, as businesses that are purchasing power. We have power. We can, every time we spend money, it's a vote for how we want to be recognized or how we want to live in this world. And we're voting with our pounds, our pence and our dollars that we spend. Another simple thing, you'll notice that I've got a cardigan on today, several layers. I have turned my heating down. We're all working from home and my heating is now down 19.5. It's pretty chilly sometimes, I must say. But we just adapt, don't we? We just put an extra layer on. I might not be saving the planet on my own, but I'm making a contribution. The aggregate of incremental change is incredibly important. And that's that juxtaposition between the individual and the masses versus the short-term thinking, the practical application, and that cathedral thinking. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's about incremental, short-term, one step ahead is a step towards a better place. And I think that, again, that for me means that it's not out with the possibility for others, for everybody to make a positive contribution. It's not other people doing it, it's me doing it. And if me putting a cardi on and an extra layer is a tiny contribution, then I'm happy to make a tiny contribution. Yeah. I know that I'm just, I don't want it to be just a verbiage, just talking at you, but the next point is about our just general consumption and waste. I've made a commitment to, on a personal level, to repair, reuse and recycle. And in this last year, my washing machine and my fridge freezer both broke. And my washing machine was 26 years old. I don't even know how it lasted that long, but it actually got to the point where it couldn't be repaired. But I found somebody moving house literally 2 miles away, who was moving into a house with another, all the white goods were there. And I had a secondhand washing machine for £20 that is absolutely perfect. It was, you know, at least 22 years younger than my previous washing machine. And it does the job brilliantly. And, you know, considering my previous washing machine was so old, this feels like, you know, it's like gold standard, even though it might be 3 years old. The same thing happened with the fridge freezer. Again, someone was moving house literally 3 miles away, and we have a brand new fridge freezer that is completely fine, and it cost me £50. There's absolutely no reason why I needed to buy a new one. I really don't mind that the fact that it doesn't quite, you know, match my kitchen. It does the job brilliantly. So yeah, buy secondhand. My other personal commitment is, you know, to buy as many clothes as I possibly can that are secondhand. You know, do I actually need to buy something new? You know, this top here is literally 14 years old. I look after it for special occasions. But my idea really is about, you know, my own personal consumption, you know, really challenging things and my own view. And then that spills out into the world of work as well. You know, if we're looking for new furniture in the office, do I need to buy brand new furniture, or do I look at some sort of secondhand options? My laptop's screen is, I have a separate screen on my laptop, and I bought that secondhand as well. We bought a number of those during lockdown, and they're all secondhand as well. They completely work. It's, you know, I don't need a brand new laptop screen, a screen. One of the other points is about, I think I mentioned it earlier, about our white paper and the idea of planting trees. You know, I think that we should respect our green spaces and protect our green spaces as much as possible. My uncle, he lives in Brazil. He lives actually in an island off the coast of Brazil, off the east coast of Brazil, and it's a protected island. It's a wildlife nature reserve, and he has told me in the last 20 years since he's lived there about the reduction in dolphins and marine life. It's literally 200 nautical miles into the ocean, and even that far away from mainland, he has seen the consequences of green space being diminished on the island itself. Tourism has had a massive impact, and he's really alerted my mind to what we can do all the way across the other side of the world to protect the green spaces that are around us in our communities as well. Just a simple idea of, you know, planting trees. The Woodland Trust is doing some amazing work that I highly recommend people investigating. You know, and simple sort of sell-on ideas like that might work well in your business. I was thinking about, you know, going to visit my uncle, and I was thinking about the flights and how much of a sort of carbon drain that is, flying. And just before lockdown, in our business, one of the things that we were writing was our travel policy. And I was doing some research on, you know, on travel and the cost of, you know, traveling by public transport and the positive impact that that can make. And so we had, this is before lockdown, and things have obviously changed, and this could be revitalized when we're doing more traveling. But take the train first, or take public transport first, was definitely our ethos and how we were trying to encourage our team rather than drive to somewhere? Can we get there through public transport? Is that feasible? If we have to travel a long way, if we have to go on a plane, let's absolutely choose not to go business class. Business class has 3 times the higher carbon footprint than an economy flight, just because of the space that you're taking up. A simple thing like that, I didn't even recognize until I started to do the investigation. And the Grantham Institute, as part of Imperial College in London, sponsored a piece of work on the difference between flying from London to Amsterdam for a meeting and getting the train. It's 58 kilos of carbon dioxide to fly, and 3 to take the train. So, let's look at our travel policies when we are back in the office, when we, if that's what we're doing after a hybrid way of working. Let's consider those things. Is there a policy that we can create that says, actually, we aren't necessarily going to fly. Everything on Zoom. We can do everything on Zoom. There's loads of other platforms as well. Does that serve us? Is flying up and down to London from Edinburgh really necessary? No, it isn't. Can we take the train? Is that the option? It might take a little bit longer, or it might not actually. The train these days is super fast. Or do we leave the car at home? Do we walk places? Again, that opportunity, that personal health and well-being that can come from physical exercise. Is there a chance in our businesses that allows people to have walking meetings? Again, before lockdown, we definitely had walking meetings. We had a number of leadership development sessions for our own teams and team development sessions, and one of the options was always a walking meeting. Some people don't want to do that, but it was always an option. I actually really love walking meetings myself. There's a sense of sort of mindfulness of the stepping towards something that allows your mind to sort of disconnect and reconnect in a different way. So I highly recommend a walking meeting. Yeah. The final thing that I think is a practical application that people could do is actually, have you ever had a carbon footprint business review? There are lots of businesses out there that would do that. Why don't you consider doing that? That could be part of a team development session. What do we want to stand for as a business? How do we want our people to engage with us? Is our purpose have more meaning? Purpose does have more meaning than just profit and growth. How can we perhaps ground some of those ideas into our purpose, linked to our vision, linked to our mission? And how does, again, I'll go back right to the beginning of the conversation about those sustainable development goals. How do they fit in? Lots to think about. But I do believe that creating a thriving business by just thinking about some of the things we've talked about today will help us have a thriving Scotland, that will really create an economy that needs to support the people of Scotland, people of this world, the people of this planet, and our planet as well.
And I think what's good about the 9 tips, and I've written them down so that we can kind of like summarize them in bullet points, Bonnie. But it's what you're really saying is a business of well-being. What it's truly about is simple measures. While economic systems change might sound big and daunting, and how do we do that? We start by small steps, and you talked about incremental change, and it's like compound interest, isn't it, when you all make small actions. And I remember somebody once saying, I think it was for one of the tea companies, they did a sustainability analysis, and they found that the biggest use of energy was when the people went to put the kettle on to boil the tea bag. And it was like, can you imagine if everybody only puts the right amount of water in the tea? And going back to what you said, you know, these 9 tips, it's like, 1, can you be a voice for change, either within your business or without, you know, speaking to other people externally? 2, get your supply chain involved and start asking questions there. 3, have you shifted to a green energy tariff? 4, turn your heating down. 5, look at repair, reuse, recycle. 6, buy second-hand clothes, and that applies in, you know, in the workplace, without the workplace. 7, respect green spaces and plant trees. 8, look at your travel policy and make a decision whether you can get train or public transport, or even consider walking meetings, which brings you into direct connection with the earth as well. And then lastly, looking at that carbon footprint. And I think what's really powerful about those 9 tips that you've highlighted there, of how easy it is to be a business that looks at the well-being of people and planet, is that those 9 tips for businesses also apply to individuals as well, showing that there is no difference. We need to be doing the same things in our personal life as we need to be doing in businesses. And again, that compound impact is what then shifts us more towards that wellbeing economy, the thriving Scotland, the thriving businesses.
Yeah. Businesses are a collection of individuals who collectively can make a difference. You know, I'm a great believer of the democratization of leadership, as I've said. You know, that it's not the I believe everybody has a positive contribution to make. I think that sometimes people forget that they're allowed to make a positive contribution because it's not their job, or it's not their pay grade, or it's not. But that's why I'm really determined. And actually, within the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland, the dimensions, they've got 7 dimensions for businesses to contribute to economic system change, and one of those is participation and leadership. You know, your voice is important. But I think we could spend a long time again talking about all of those different dimensions, and how we can use those dimensions perhaps as a blueprint for businesses to think about what their the shape of their business is, that how they can pivot mindfully and just open the door for a conversation. That for me is all about, this is all about having the confidence to have a conversation and including other people as well.
Yeah, and it's really powerful. And you mentioned those 7 dimensions, and how leadership and participation is one of them. And I'd just like to go through the 7 dimensions so that people understand and see how simple they are. I think if I remember correctly, because for full disclosure, I did a bit of work with the Wellbeing Economy Scotland and co-wrote the report, which was about thriving businesses in the thriving Scotland. And I think off the top of my head, and you're going to have to help me here, Bonnie, to remember all seven dimensions. This is a learning exercise. I mean, one of the first dimensions is about redefining success. So when you were talking about that 10-year business plan that you've got for your own company, are you able to actually think long term in terms of what your redefining success is? And then I think from that it went into
the ownership and the governance.
Yes, the ownership and the governance.
Yeah. No, is there a place in the world for employee ownership, for example? You know, and how do you make that transition? And what would it be like to have a cooperative, or and just thinking about, you know, different stakeholders, or again, that I think for me that leads again into that participation and leadership where everybody has a voice. But when you get that that participation from everybody, there's a space, there's oxygen in the conversation. And what happens when there's oxygen in a conversation? It creates curiosity, it creates innovation, which is another of those dimensions: service innovation and product innovation. When people are given the freedom to think and open their minds and really are asked, what do you see that I'm not seeing? Where are my blind spots as a business leader? All of a sudden you have a whole load of people who are very creative and spot opportunities. And so that again speaks to that product and service innovation dimension. I think it's really important. Then we go on to the community and stakeholder engagement, which I really love the idea of as well. For me, there's some really fantastic examples of businesses that have built their businesses around their communities to serve them. The drinks company over in Islay, I know that you know them as well.
Yeah.
They've regenerated crop rotation cycles to 50% of the grain that they use for their drinks business comes from the people and the land. You know, they are really embedded in their community. They are a foundation business in a small community, and you know, that speaks volumes of, you know, the reinvestment opportunity that a business can have.
Yeah, and I think that's Bruch. I can never say it. Bruichladdich, isn't it?
That's it.
over in Islay, and I think that's really, really powerful, because I mean, I'm writing them down here, and you've done a great job of going over them. So it's like 1, redefining success; 2, ownership and governance; 3, leadership and participation; 4, I think, was the community and the stakeholder impact, which you've just mentioned there. 5 was product and service innovation. 6 was accounting and return for impact. And I know we want to come back to that one before we wrap up. But then the last one, which I think is also really powerful, is learning together, which is what we're doing in this conversation today and throughout the entire future series as well, of being able to say, how can we all learn together? That cognitive capacity that you mentioned earlier of bringing everybody on board. Yeah, and I think that some businesses are afraid to learn together, because some business leaders have this real sense that they need to have all the answers, and that otherwise why are they justified being the leader? But actually, we don't all see the same thing. We all have a slightly different slant. We have a different perspective on what's happening around us, and actually learning together and spotting mistakes early saves time and money and effort, and is absolutely the key to being able to pivot towards a better outcome more quickly, which I think also then leads into a little bit more of a discussion around that accounting for impact and return on investment, because accounting for impact is about telling great stories to enhance and share with others about what can be done. It doesn't have to be difficult. It can be very, very, some simple things. We just have to have creativity and curiosity, and actually be bold enough to say we're on this, I say the J word, the journey, and we might not get it right all the time, but this is our intention and this is our ambition, and this is how we can do it. We want to be held accountable to some of the things that we're saying that we want to do, and we want to make an impact. But the return on investment doesn't have to be, you know, a GDP figure of growth that we're insatiably connected to in a Western world. Does it actually have to be, you know, a 20% growth year on year? Does that actually make a better workplace? Does it make a better country? Does it enhance the well-being of the people that we want to be in our business and that we pay? So there's a really interesting unpacking of the concept of accounting for impact and return on investment that I think business leaders will have some really difficult, challenging conversations with themselves and with their boards, but it's absolutely worth doing. It's worth challenging ourselves to have these conversations. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Bonnie. I'd just like to open it up to those who are attending today to hear if you've got any comments, thoughts, questions, reflections on the conversation that we've just had. I think there's lots of thoughtful faces. Jimmy.
Sandy and I were chatting this morning about Remarkable. So I'm assuming, do you work together?
That's correct.
Correct.
I suppose the question that stimulates is, although you were talking about, Bonnie, you were talking about the journey, what from now, COP26, what do you reckon should be our starting point as an individual within my network, not just a working network, but a voluntary network and a family network? Can they all merge, or should they all be independent and having different facets? I know that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but what I'm trying to do is address my input, but take into consideration the feedback and the conversations in these 3 specific networks, which are, I suppose, attributed to me.
Well, I'm happy to try and answer that question. I think that everything's interconnected. We live in a system, and there's no one independent way of thinking or working. Everything is part of a system in some way or shape or form. And I think that the very easiest thing to do as a starter is just start a conversation and say, well, what do you think? What does that actually mean to you? What does it mean to my network as a network? What does it mean? Who do we stand for? What do we stand for? Can we make one step of change that will make a difference? And that's a simple thing that you can ask with your family. I mean, I'm constantly having this conversation at home. Okay, so what more can we do? What's the one step? What step can we take that's going to be built into our normal modus operandi of a day-to-day basis? What's important to us, and how can I change that? How can we change that? We're constantly just having conversations about it, because if we have a conversation, it becomes part of our normal daily thinking. It's in our minds. It's not something out there. So I would just ask questions and be curious. What can we do that will make a difference? And they're all interconnected.
If you get feedback then from them, but I'm only one person, because this is what does happen. You were saying there about turning the heating down by 0.5 degree or 1 degree. I get the response, but I'm finding it cold, can I put the heating up? So
yeah,
I mean, what difference is that going to make is some of the questions that I get asked at home.
I think it's funny because what the difference is that it makes is that it all of a sudden is important. A tiny change can be important, and actually the first thing you can say was, could you put a jumper on? Which is what I'm saying all the time at home. Do you want to put a jumper on? Or what about a hot water bottle? Or come and give me a cuddle. It sounds so simple, but if all of those conversations, they become the norm then, don't they? That's the normal way of working. Shall we walk to the shop? That's what I say. Should we walk to the shop rather than jump in the car? So it's not raining. It's nice. Let's wrap up warm. We can come home and we can have a nice hot chocolate or something. It might not sound like it's making an impact, but I totally believe that the aggregate of incremental change can be phenomenal. And I have to believe that those things matter.
I think that was part of what I was trying to come to terms with. I'm saying, but what such a minute difference. So my apologies. Can I turn this off? My apologies.
No, Jimmy, it's fine. It's life, isn't it? I believe that little things matter, and that the reason why I think that little things matter is because as an individual, as a person, often it's the littlest things that someone say to me that make the biggest impact in my life. I've got a broken neck. I'm recovering from a broken neck. And when I was in hospital, the tiniest thing was one person who I knew who worked at the hospital came to visit me. And she wasn't my best friend. She was just somebody I knew. And because she'd made the effort of walking from one ward where she walked next door to come and see me, it made the biggest impact on my recovery while I was in hospital, because she actually cared about me. And it was the tiniest thing, but it made the biggest impact. And so from a personal perspective, I know that little tiny things can make a big impact. So I have to believe that the aggregate of little tiny things can make a big impact somewhere along the line. I believe that.
We've just got a comment there saying, apologies for joining late. I'm connecting in from Canada. You don't have your timing off. What's actually happened, Cassandra, is that our clocks went back just at the weekend. So the timing is off until your clocks go back as well. We've now got less hours between Canada and the US. So that's where the timing has come. But she's got a comment here saying the statement, aggregate of incremental change is phenomenal, is quite powerful. The awareness of individuals asking these types of questions, shall we walk, shall I put on a jumper, etc., and shifting this to the business unit can be incredible. So just a bit of feedback from people who are not on screen but listening to the conversation as well.
Thank you, Cassandra.
So we've got a couple of minutes left before we wrap up today's conversation, and where I think I'd like to go in terms of wrapping up. This has been very much what kind of small action can we take? So I'd love it if everybody just typed into the chat room, what small action do you feel inspired to take after today's conversation? You know, we had this long list of voice for change, asking about the supply chain, the green energy, the turning heating down, maybe buying secondhand clothes or planting trees and respecting green spaces. Or maybe there's some other small incremental action that you're inspired to take. And if you just take a moment and just type it into the chat box, Bonnie, you're more than welcome to add. I know you've been already adding a list, and I'm sitting racking my brain going, after listening to this, what small incremental action would I actually take? Got some buying local fruit and veggies, taking the plane instead of the train, using your car less, exploring carbon footprint in more detail. Cassandra's saying there's a challenge here about not buying clothing for a year. Ooh, and when you begin or need to really search for sustainability and locally made clothes, that's a great challenge. Talking more. My life has been about extending product life. I love that, Jimmy. Talking more about extending human life instead, which I know that you're already doing. Going vegan, engaging with our supply chain more. So some really great inspirational actions taken there as a result of your conversation, Bonnie. And, you know, we'll be gathering these conversations and these actions throughout the Scotland Net Zero community and looking at how they continue to grow so that we can actually document exactly what you've been talking about here, Bonnie, how small incremental action can lead to big change. Thank you so much for being our guest speaker for this afternoon session, Bonnie. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you everybody else who has been listening in live, and looking forward to hearing the thoughts of everybody who's listening in afterwards with the recording. And please, you know, you'll see a little chat box below this conversation. Type in what you're inspired to do after listening to this so that we can find out more action that's been taken as a result of this conversation. Thank you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me.